With over 2 decades of experience reporting across different sectors and fields, as part of NDTV for 21 years, she broke and covered several critical and game-changing stories and is now running her own path-breaking news channel called Mojo. She has won many national and international awards, including the Padma Shri. She has been traveling alongside with migrant laborers practically since the lockdown began, and her coverage of the plight faced by our fellow citizens has been deeply moving and pivotal in shining a light on stories we as a nation would normally not hear about. Our second panelist for the day is Dr. S. Irudaya Rajan, a leading regional and global migration scholar and a preeminent academic. With over 2 decades of research experience on migration, migration patterns, and demographic dynamics. As professor and chair of the research unit on international migration at the Center for CDS, the Center for Development Studies in Kerala, Dr. Rajan has conducted numerous national and international research projects with organizations such as the ILO, UN agencies, World Bank, and the European Union, and also conducted several important migration surveys in conjunction with both the central government and state government. Our last panelist for the day is Mr. Dushyant Dave, the president of the Supreme Court Bar Association of India, a senior advocate practicing in the Supreme Court and a very distinguished legal luminary. Mr. Dave's breadth of knowledge and expertise is extremely wide and covers various fields, ranging from constitutional law to administrative law to civil laws to arbitration laws. Mr. Dave has been at the bar for over 3 decades, during which he has appeared for several thousand matters before various high courts and the Supreme Court. We really appreciate the legal insight he brings with him to the table and regarding the topic beforehand us today. Hi, Shrey, over to you to start the discussion.
All right, so we will start with an opening question to the panelists. The first question is for Mrs. Barkha Dutt. Now, throughout this pandemic, we've seen sort of the invisible workforce into the floor because of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, maybe we never realized who really runs the city. Maybe we never appreciated the urban-rural divide. So given that you've been on the road, given that it's your 82nd day, I believe, what do we not understand sitting at home about the migrant crisis that you've had an opportunity to see on the ground?
Okay, thank you, Shrey. I think that's a very interesting question. Had I not stepped out to undertake this journey, a journey in which we have now clocked 16,000 kilometers across 12 states, I think I would have remained cocooned in the privilege and elitism of middle class and upper middle class India that most of us represent, at least here today. I think it took me coming out to understand that the people we see every day in our cities, whether it's at the construction sites coming up next to our homes, whether it's the women who come and clean our kitchens, whether it's the people who power our textile factories or our diamond industries, they are all in this nomenclature that we have come to call migrant workers. What does it mean? Very simply, they're people who live in the villages, but actually work in the cities, and they earn as little as 200 to 300 rupees a day. And I don't think that previous to this, of course, I've been a journalist for many years. Of course, I was mindful of poverty, but I don't think I had ever paused to consider what might happen to a family when you take away even those 200 and 300 rupees from them, and then you also take away from them any sense of dignity, any sense of belonging, any sense of citizenship, right? And I think that's what we really did in this pandemic. I took a photograph today at a railway station where there was a coach that said second class. And to me, that image said everything about what we had reduced our workers to. We had treated them as a society, as a country, as a state, as second class citizens. So I think for me, this has been in my 40s an educative journey, a journey where I have been forced to reflect on my own privilege, have been forced to reflect on my own elitism, have been forced to reflect also on the priorities of media, a media that has never done these stories, that has never told these stories before, to walk into Dharavi in Mumbai and discover that there are 8,000 common bathrooms for 8 lakh people. Now, this statistic has been true for years. Where is the journalism on it? Where have all of us been? We haven't been telling these stories. So to that extent, I think this has been a very transformative and learning experience for me.
Definitely. Going off on that point, Dr. Rajan, you study migration. And so, in line with what Ms. Barkha Dutt said, what she's seen from her on-ground reporting, to what extent have the migration patterns that we're seeing now, to what extent do they divert from historical migration patterns? And could this crisis that we're facing right now have been predicted? Could policymakers have foreseen the kind of migration patterns that we're seeing at the moment? I believe you're muted, Doctor.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. No, I think I wanted to start with saying that I follow the earlier speaker, Barkha Dutt. The point is that India failed its citizens, partly because we have no idea of how many migrants will be affected by the lockdown. I think nobody had not even imagined that the migrants are living something like from Kerala to Northeast. They have to cross 4,000 kilometers to reach. So I think because our understanding on migration is very weak, very weak. In fact, we have never integrated them into any policy. Because when I see them, even pre-COVID, they were like this. Only thing is they were invisible. I think COVID brought them to the visible, to the limelight of every journalist, every media, every newspaper, every magazine. So that is where we have failed. And if you look at it, today, when I talk to you people, India has 600 million people. 600 million people living in a place they are not born. It includes all of you listening to here, maybe 100 plus. But please remember, out of the 600 million in 2020, 200 millions are intra-district and interstate. That means between the state, there are districts. People cannot move. The lockdown made them not to move between districts. So there are something like 200 million people are asked them to be at a place. Their life is based on mobility. They make money, livelihood, everything based on the mobility. Out of that, 140 million are the migrants which we are talking today, which is at least 2 times more than what we are talking about the independence. So we are talking about 140 million migrants, not the small number. And this number is not known to anyone. Even today, when I talk to you, everybody talking about 8 crores. No, it is 14 crores. And that is something very important. And we were created the number. You look at the latest government policy. They were talking about smart city. Smart city means migration. You can't talk about city like what she said about Dharavi. We know Dharavi. It's not something new to us. It is a hot belt of health issues. But we never realized COVID will come and show them Bombay as one of the city which is going to, a lot of people are going to be affected by COVID. So I think this is where we have failed to recognize them. And before, one more thing I want to say. The migration corridors, we don't know. Where to send the train, we don't know. I think these are all important things for us. Not only we don't know the number, we don't know the migration corridors. Where are the people are moving? You are sending train where there are maybe not many people. Which states are sending states? Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, UP, and which are the receiving states or gaining states? Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. So I think these corridors also not known to people. In fact, we have done one big mistake. During the lockdown 1.0, we would have given just 5 days. Just 5 days for the migrant to move. All of them would have moved. Whoever want to move. Even today, not many people are not moving. I'm seeing in my own city, in Trivandrum, people are staying there because the migrants, not everybody want to leave. People who want to leave, they would have left. You do not see anything what we are seeing, the road, dying in the train, road, railway thing, because we failed to recognize them. Now we are sending them trains. When the COVID in March 24 was only 500 in this country. Today, we are crossing 2 lakhs and we are emerging as the fifth country globally. And now we are sending them back to, to send them to see their parents, old people, and they are going to rural areas, not only with no money, you are creating them, what someone told, we are sending them Corona Express. I think something very serious. We have done a big mistake by not allowing them to go in the lockdown 1.0.
All right. And so, as you point out, there has been sort of this lack of foresight on the executive part, on the executive's part. So, Mr. Dave, when the executive, the judiciary is supposed to keep the executive in check, but of late, a lot of people have been talking about the sort of inertia with the Supreme Court in particular. So we had statements with the Supreme Court saying, how can we stop migrant workers from walking? How can we stop them sleeping on the railway tracks? And so from your perspective, what has the Supreme Court done and what has it not? And in what ways could it have done more to at least counter or act as an effective check to the executive?
First and foremost, let me congratulate my co-panelists Barkha Dutt and Professor Rajan for doing outstanding work in these times of crisis. These are the people, few people who really are making a difference in the country because sadly, I must say, and I do agree with Barkha, that not just the middle class, but the rich class or the haves have all really virtually neglected these millions and millions and millions of migrant workers. So I think first my compliments to them and my gratitude on behalf of my nation to them for doing what they are doing. And I do hope and trust that they will continue to do their work during this crisis. Now to answer you, let me first begin by telling you something which is so important today, almost after 75 years of our independence. And this is what Dr. Ambedkar had said on 25th of November 1949, on the last day, concluding day of the Constituent Assembly, which gave us the Constitution of India. As you all know, that Dr. Ambedkar was the chairman of the drafting committee of our beautiful document called Constitution of India, which to my mind is one of the best in the world. And it must be worshipped by every Indian, like Gita, Bible, Quran, or Guru Granth Sahib. And unfortunately, sadly, everybody has forgotten what the Constitution of India is about, except paying some lip service. This is what Ambedkar said in his speech that day, and I quote, "The third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy. What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life." Now, what is the COVID crisis telling you in last 10 weeks? That every one of these principles, whether liberty, equality, or fraternity, have been thrown out of window by one and all, especially by our great government. So this is the first thing. Secondly, let me tell you something, that Ambedkar was, very, very concerned about future of India. And that is why, unlike most constitutions in the world, this written document that we have is specifically provided fundamental rights. And one of those rights is Article 21, which says that no citizen shall be deprived of his life and liberty without due process of law. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. The executive power of the government lies with the President of India. I mean, although we are a parliamentary democracy, but President is technically the head of the nation. And Article 53 very beautifully puts this power in the President, which power must be acknowledged by everybody working in the government. And this is where there is a complete failure by everyone concerned, whether it's the President, whether it's the Prime Minister, every minister, and everybody. And I'll come back why it is. Article 53 says that the executive power of the Union shall be vested in the President and shall be exercised by him directly or indirectly through officers subordinate to him in accordance with this Constitution. So the power conferred upon the government is not an absolute power. It must be exercised in consonance with the Constitution. Now, if Constitution says that you will not take away the life of citizens without due process of law, then everybody is bound by that mandate. And life does not include merely life. Today, life has been interpreted to mean dignity of life, livelihood, there are myriad ways in which life can be interpreted and has in fact been interpreted by the Supreme Court over the last seven decades. Now that, that kind of a life had to be protected. And the first and foremost failure is therefore on the part of the government. There is a complete failure of governance in tackling the migrant workers crisis. Government should have foreseen, I mean, Professor Rajan rightly says that people, there are migrant workers and we should have been concerned about that. If I were Prime Minister, if I am a minister, if I am a bureaucrat, a cabinet secretary or top bureaucrat, I have a constitutional obligation to know what my citizens' problems are going to be. I cannot be oblivious to those problems. I cannot now say in hindsight that, oh, I didn't know that there are something like 10, 20 crores of migrant workers. That's something which you should have known because you are in governance. And if you don't know that in January, then you have no business to be in power, period. So first and foremost, when China indicated the pandemic in January, the government of India should have immediately taken a very serious view of it. And let me tell you something, it's not that government was oblivious. Some officers of the government were concerned, and this is what they had created on that day, as early as that day. This is the containment plan, novel coronavirus disease 2019. It was prepared by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. It's an exhaustive document. And amongst the subjects that this document speaks about is the migrant workers situation. Now, government therefore was conscious. If government, why is it that despite that consciousness, government didn't start acting by January is really something which nobody in this country has raised. Nobody, no mainstream media is taking up. We must confront our government before we come to the problems faced by the migrant workers. That why is it that government failed to see that? So this is something which is so important. Now coming to the judiciary, under the constitution, judiciary has an absolute obligation, absolute duty, and they themselves called it a pious duty to protect fundamental rights of every citizen in as many means as possible. Under Article 32, Supreme Court can take suo motu cognizance. Under Article 226, every High Court must take suo motu cognizance. And this is what they are for. Because as Ambedkar said, what's the point of giving rights if there are no remedies? Now, these rights have virtually become, worth base paper baskets in last 10 weeks. The judges never took any cognizance of the problem. And this is really the issue that we must understand, that the judiciary has definitely failed this country. And when history is written 100 years later, it will be written that judges of India failed the citizens. Definitely. So this is something which we cannot overlook. We must acknowledge and we must confront both our government and our judges.
Definitely. So coming to the aspect of what the government could have done, we have seen that there are disparities in India within state and the central government. So we've seen that there are disparities with some states having an exceedingly competent response, some states which have dropped the ball. So, Mrs. Barkha Dutt, you've traveled all over the country, different states. You've spoken to Aditya Thackeray. You've spoken to the Kerala Health Minister. What is your sense of the center versus state divide in their approach towards the coronavirus?
So I just first want to thank you, Dushyant, for your feedback and for your compliments. I just wanted to add one thing about the courts. On the 30th of March, the Solicitor General Tushar Mehta told the Supreme Court that there were no more migrants on the road. I have been on the road for 2 months after the 30th of March, and I have till about a week or 10 days ago, every single day of my journey, seen migrants on the road. They have either been walking, children without slippers, men and women, for hundreds of kilometers. Sometimes I have met them walking through the desolation of the night, with no food, nothing. Sometimes I have seen hundreds of them crammed onto the backs of trucks on highways like the one I'm sitting on right now. And sometimes I've seen them on trains where they were made to pay for their tickets. So when Mr. Mehta told the Supreme Court that there are no migrants on the roads, that was absolutely false. And I found it very peculiar that later he said that those who are pointing this out are vultures or prophets of doom. So I just wanted to make that point. I also want to say that while we are talking about institutional failure, I think there has been a colossal failure by the mainstream media. It was only about 50-55 days after some of us had already been on the road that television channels even bothered to start sending reporters out. This coverage was driven from inside studios with talking heads, which is not where the story of India's poorest people was. It was not even where the story of India's sick people was. It was inside COVID hospitals. But other than stringers in our small cities, other than a handful of independent journalists and some brave city newspapers, there was virtually no reporting on this story. So we must also talk about the institutional failure of the media. Now coming to states versus center. I think that the one mistake that has happened is the complete absence of coordination. If there had been centralization where there was needed and decentralization where there was needed, we would not have seen this migrant worker crisis. I remember the morning after the lockdown is when I began this journey, and I went to the borders of Delhi and I saw hundreds of thousands of people walking. And I tweeted every single chief minister, I tweeted every single union minister saying, stop this. You can either stop it or enable it properly. In buses, as you know, Professor Rajan said, if you had just run India's railways for 3 days, all the migrants would have been home in the beginning of this crisis. The railways carry 23 million people every single day. But we neither were able to stop them with dignity, with wages, with work, nor were we able to send them home. And we just had a situation where our chief ministers were not talking to each other, and we had no centralized policy. We had shut down a country with 4 hours notice, forgetting 2 data points. 45 million at least migrant workers live in India. We have seen the biggest exodus of human beings since the partition of India. Secondly, you're telling poor people to stay at home. You are forgetting that 92 million Indian households live in one room, which means sometimes 5 to 8 people are living in one room. What is the safety that you're ensuring by pushing them inside? In slum tenements where there are no separate kitchens, there are no separate bathrooms. We aped a Western model of a lockdown. We uniformly imposed it across the country. We did not vary it according to state and cultural needs. In every state, people live differently. People's housing is different. The space available is different. And I really, really believe that where you needed to give your chief ministers independence, you did not. And where you need a centralized policy, you did not. So I think this is the sort of chaos we have seen, especially when it comes to managing the movement of our workers. Because imagine the irony, we are sending our workers home just as the restrictions are lifting. So now you want your factories to open and you have all of your factory owners saying, come back, after not giving these men and women wages, after not giving them dignity, and imagine after making them pay to go home. After taking away everything from them, we have made them pay to go home.
Definitely. Professor Rajan, on that point about just snatching away dignity, people without wages, without food to feed their families, there have been many ideas. That the union government has the one ration, one cup scheme. There's the Manrega scheme. There has been talk of a universal basic income, so a direct deposit into bank accounts. So, in your experience, what can the different state governments and the central governments do now, even at this point, to ensure that the migrants at least have the ability to feed their families?
Unmute, please.
Yeah. So first thing, I also agree with Barkha Dutt. State government also have failed. State government have completely failed. I think both the sending states, which they were receiving a lot of money through remittances, and the receiving states, which they are growing because of the migrants. Because, for example, I cannot imagine Bombay without migrants, Delhi without migrants, and even Kerala state, I cannot remain without migrants. I think every state has failed, and they become no citizen in their own country. It's like a refugees. Somebody refugee, we heard about refugees in some other places. We are seeing them in our own country walking them. Nobody wants them. I think this is a very psychological stress for the migrants. In fact, I was telling some people, he talked about farmer suicides. I am hearing already migrants are committing suicide and they're returning back. There is nothing to offer for them. And please remember, never, never, never in the history of migration, return migrants, when they go back home, they go with empty hands. They go with money, gifts to their family, wives, children, parents, neighbors, and relatives. This is the first time they are begging for their tickets. Migrants are not beggars. They may not be fighting the war between countries. They are fighting poverty. They are fighting malnutrition. They are fighting unemployment. They are fighters and they are heroes in their own home. Now they are going as heroes without any money. And second thing, there is a stigma for them this time. They are going not only without money, and they were told you are a carrier of COVID-19. So they have two big problems, psychological stress. That's why some people are running, some people are even committing suicide. I'm seeing already reports coming up from some states. The returned migrants going home, they have been quarantined, they have no money, always they have money. And in that context, what did we do? When the Prime Minister announced 20 lakh crores, Finance Minister spoke about 5 days press conference. What do they offer for migrants? Only one day there was a word about migrants. Only one day. And what do they say? They say 4 things. One is one nation, one card. That is not today. They don't want ration card, my dear friend. We have to give them something on urgent basis. They said housing for the migrants. Forget about that. It's a long-term one. Then they said NREG, they will add some crores of money. But NREGs, you have to register. You have to put your name. They are not there. They are migrants sitting in countries of states of origin. They are coming back. And the only thing they offered was 8 crore migrants, they can get free rice for 2 months, 5 kg rice, 1 kg wheat. Remember, it is not 8 crore migrants, it is 8 crore families. One migrant support back 4 people at home. I have seen in the Gulf. I have seen in a fellow working in Kerala might be sending money to Tripura. 4 people might be earning 5 is earning here. And 8 crore thing, and you are talking about the average household size in the country is 5 people per household. And you are giving 5 kg rice for next 2 months. What happened to the lockdown period? They were sacrificed for the country. It's like they are heroes. You told them to sit at home. They were sit there and they were walking. And you are not offered them anything for the last days, April and May. And then nothing you talk about them giving cash incentives. That's why I was talking in many magazines last at least 2-3 weeks now. Please give them something in the hand. I am telling the government, I wrote in the long interview a week back, 25,000 rupees should be deposited to all the migrants. 14 crores, which I tell, government tell 8 crores. Even you put 14 crore migrant, 25,000 rupees in their account, it will come to 3 lakh crore, which is 1/6 of the amount offered by our Prime Minister, 20 crore, 1/6. And please remember, rural area is going to be deep depression now. There will be unemployment, there will be poverty, there will be malnutrition, and they are going, including the coronavirus. It is already reaching in the rural areas. I can see that Kerala had only 0 case, not even single coronavirus. 15 days back, yesterday we had 100 plus. So we are carrying them, that there is no health care. And please remember today, when I talk to you, 50% of the deaths of the coronavirus is above 50 years, are the elderly people. Now the migrants are going back to their parents, grandparents. The migrants might come out from the coronavirus, but their elderly parents. I think we are going to experience even heavy death rate among the elderly in the rural areas. So I think we are getting into, we heard about the America's depression in 19th century. So I think we are getting into a deep depression, and unless you give them money in their hands, because all the 20 lakh crore talks about supply, but supply has no implication unless you have to create demand. Demand has to come through hard cash, and you have to give them some money, because first time they are going with their empty hands. Give them some money. And the Supreme Court said, give them free ticket, water. I think Supreme Court should intervene. Please give them some money too. Why not some money? So much money is lying in many welfare fund boards. And so much money is lying in the Prime Minister Care Fund, Chief Minister Care Fund. Maharashtra Chief Minister said, I will pay for all the workers in the train ticket. I said, Chief Minister Relief Fund is not only to buy ventilators. Sorry, you need ventilator for the people who are likely to die. And you have to talk about livelihood. You have to talk about people who are living. They are equally important. Life and livelihood is the two sides of the coin. You talk about life, coronavirus, but what about livelihood? For the poor, livelihood is important. For them, corona does not matter for them. That's why they are standing in the queue. They don't care about social distance. I have seen in that railway station, roads, they don't care.
All right. So I know that Mr. Barkha that you have to leave, so I'll come to you quickly for a comment. What Dr. Rajan is saying is very similar to what you said yourself, which is that you believe that the humanitarian crisis that the migrants are facing is actually a bigger challenge than the coronavirus pandemic. So this audience is largely comprised of students. So, we're sitting in our big cities largely. What do you think we can do to deal with this humanitarian crisis? How can we pitch in to actually make a difference?
So I think firstly, the assumption that people have that at an individual level, or unless you're a doctor or a nurse today, you can do nothing is absolutely not true. Even Mumbai, where I just spent a week and where, in some ways is really the epicenter of the virus in India, there are people who are asking for volunteers. So, and you don't have to have any knowledge of medicine. What's happening really is it's not so much a shortage of beds, it's a shortage of people to staff them. There's a shortage of people to even document and assess every day what somebody's blood pressure is, what somebody's blood sugar is. So, you know what? There are many spaces in these hospitals, in these medical camps, where if you're healthy and you're young, sign up, volunteer, go and chip in. There are certainly places I've seen in multiple cities that need volunteers. There are small things you can do at the level of community. I covered a story in Surat, Dushyant State, where in housing societies, homes started to make 5 extra rotis, right? So something so small like in your home, if 5 rotis are being made, just get 10 rotis made. Make sure that they go to a camp which is feeding migrant workers. I mean, right now, workers are not mobile, but there was a time when they were on the streets and they had no food and they were dependent on the food that they would get at these camps. Stigma, you are young people. For those of us old enough to remember, we last saw this kind of stigma with HIV patients. It was totally not rooted in science. It was totally not rooted in logic. We're seeing the same sort of stigma, the same sort of taboos. That's crazy. Someone who has coronavirus is a victim, not a perpetrator. He or she is just an ill person like somebody else. And lastly, please argue with your housing societies, argue with your parents if necessary. I remember meeting a domestic help worker in one of the tenements in Mumbai, and she said to me, the virus was brought by the middle class and the rich on a plane, and it's the poor who are on the street on a cycle. And the way we are shunning our help, we're acting like they're the criminals. We have stigmatized the poor. We're all in our rich classes acting like it's the poor who got this virus. It's the poor who are spreading this virus. We are as capable. Anyone is capable of being a vector, right? So we have to understand that this is a magnified form of, let's say, swine flu and dengue or the common cold. It's a magnified form, a more lethal form. But a carrier is not a criminal. Unless you are doing something willfully negligent, willfully indulgent, willfully self-indulgent, someone who is a vector is not a criminal. Also, the world has opened up. We are going to have to open up and learn to live with this virus in some way. And we can't keep judging fellow citizens for being ill. So those are just my last thoughts. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Mr. Dave, coming back to you for a quick comment before we move to the question and answer session. Dr. Ranjan pointed out how the Supreme Court has completely abdicated its responsibility. You touched on that. In fact, there have been certain high courts that have been more proactive. But what they faced is that the Supreme Court has then stayed their decision. So coming back to the center versus state conflict and what the Supreme Court has done or not done, what do you think the high courts have done? What do you think they could have done? And at this moment, what can the judiciary do going forward? We saw an order yesterday where they said within 15 days, you have to arrange for transport.
Well, the answer to your question is a very difficult one. It's not for the courts to really, run the governments or run the nation. I quite agree to that principle. But the judiciary has a duty when the executive fails. Fails in what sense? Fails by taking an irrational and arbitrary decision, or fails by not taking the correct decision. In both the situations, judiciary has an absolute constitutional obligation to intervene. Now, supposing judiciary had intervened within hours of declaration of 4 hours lockdown on 23rd of March, 24th of March, and said nothing doing, we stay this declaration and we must give people time for at least 1 week. You must run your trains, you must run your buses, allow people to go back with dignity in a peaceful, organized manner to back to their homes. Ultimately, all these migrant workers, why do you think they are going away? They are going away because everybody like you and I, everybody feels secure in our own homes. They are not living in their homes, in their shanties and their juggies in the cities. They want to go back to the security of their small hut in a village, in their farm. And that's what government should have really done. And if government failed, Supreme Court should have stepped in and ensured that. This was the biggest colossal failure on the part of the Supreme Court and every high court. Every high court could have done that. Every high court has a right to stay the decision without being afraid of the government. The problem is in India, judiciary, like every other institution, is afraid of the government. And this is not very good thing for us as a democracy. It's not a vibrant democracy. It is a democracy which is only run on the whims and fancies of an individual. It's like demonetization. We all saw how much demonetization has destroyed the economy of the country. One evening you just get up and say demonetize. Now that's what you did when you declared 4 hours lockdown. To my mind, the measures that are ordered by the High Court, they may be good, but they are wholly insufficient and they are grossly belated. There is no doubt about the fact that these measures are not going to wipe out the tears, or much less, as everybody has said, Barkha and Professor Rajan, the situation is beyond repair now. See, these people, how are you going to get them employed now? Tell me one thing, can this migrant worker who has gone back with so much of, humiliation, so much of, sense of neglect by the entire nation, he would think million times before returning back to the cities, to work in our homes, to work in the factories, to work in restaurants, to work everybody else. It's going to take a Herculean task to persuade them, although he needs the job, he needs the money. But he knows that, if tomorrow this same nation is going to completely throw me on the streets. So how are you going to do all this? How are you? The government has no plan. It has never had a plan from day one, except 4 hours lockdown. There is no plan whatsoever. And it is incapable of producing a very, very sustained, well thought, well devised plan. That's why I wrote 2 pieces on 24th and 25th of March, and I advocated that let army be used for the purpose of allowing migrants to reach their homes in an organized manner. I also said that Prime Minister should appoint a core group of India's best minds. They should all get together, 20, 30 people from every walk of life, business, from medicine, from law, from every other field. Prime Minister must get the right advice. I mean, these are not times, where governmental officials, they are working hard, nobody denies that. But these are not times where governmental officials can give out-of-box thinking. What nation needs is an out-of-box thinking. So this is where we are having a huge problem. I am seriously worried that I don't see any future. I wrote on 24th that we are heading for anarchy. And I pray not that this country should face anarchy.
Those are sobering words. Let's move to the question answer session now. We'd like both Professor Rajan and Mr. Dave, both of you, if you could answer the question with your perspectives. Meera, why don't you go ahead and read out the questions we've received from the audience?
Just wanted to say that we've got a lot of amazing questions, but because of time constraints, we're going to pick a few of them and ask. Our first question is by Saloni, and she says, considering that so many migrant workers make up the voting pool, do you think that the crisis will have an impact on the Modi fever, or will any resentment or anger towards the government right now be mitigated by the center's propaganda campaign to convince the nation that we've successfully fought the virus?
Whom are you asking that question?
So it's directed to both of you. So either of y'all can respond. Both
Well,
of
let me respond.
Dave can answer that. You can answer the question, sir.
Let me tell you something very, I would say, sad about our politics. I genuinely believe that in India, democracy only works during the elections. Once the elections are over, democracy comes to an end. And what happened in the election? This very prime minister, who is the most charismatic leader of the country, there's no denying that fact, within his own party and in the opposition. However much I may disagree with prime minister on policies, one cannot deny that fact. But what did he do when he wanted to win the election? He promised 15 lakhs of rupees in bank accounts of every citizen. Now, if you are going to win over elections with this kind of bogus promises, and nothing can be done about that, the election commission is a mute, silent spectator. Our elections are fast. Our common man he's gullible. The common man is the most simple human being you can come across. He is God-fearing. He believes this kind of nonsensical promises which our politicians make, and he will go and vote for them. So this is bound to continue. But let us hope that this crisis really makes every Indian realize that what India really needs, it's a great country with 5,000 years of history. What it really needs are people in public life who love this country, and not people who are just interested in public relations exercise, or who want to rule this country on fear. So I think perhaps this crisis might give some kind of a message to our common man, to the voters, because don't forget one thing, that ultimately, with all his popularity, Mr. Modi has actually got only 17% of the total population of the country voting for him. Rest of the people have not voted. So, it's very interesting to see how democracy can be easily manipulated by, the politicians in this country.
Yeah, I just want to add that because these migrants are not voters. They are not in the vote bank because they are not living in the place they are born. For example, the voters are supposed to be in the state. For example, even our Prime Minister has gone to Ahmedabad to vote in the last elections. His vote is in Ahmedabad. He lives in Delhi. So I think these migrants are not part of anybody's politics, either the states of origin, because they are not there when the election is happening, Uttar Pradesh or Rajasthan, and they cannot vote in Kerala because they just came there. So I think they are nowhere there. So I think migrants are probably, I don't think in their election manifesto, they are not part of the things like old people. They are not part of the agenda of any political party. I don't think that we should worry. They will make any influence in the policy. And another thing is that there is no election is going to come. Election will come after 4 years. That's why the states are fighting. See, the elections are going to come in Kerala. Elections are going to come in Tamil Nadu. So that's why the migrants are taken as a migration politics. See, today there is also a politics across the states because the state elections are coming. Wherever the elections are coming, both parties, the ruling as well as opposition, to man over the thing. You are not doing well. I would have done well. Because the election is coming next year. India, there is no election. So I don't think that it will have any serious consequence on the state, in national level, but probably in the state. For example, Kerala, election is coming in a few months from now. Suppose the people might think Kerala did well. Okay, why can't you vote communist government? Or why can't you vote ADMK government in Tamil Nadu? So I think there is a politics is going to come. So migrants are now, that's why I always tell people, don't play with politics with migrants. We should not play politics with migrants. I think now we are playing now. I have seen it in some of the discussions.
Our next question is by Mahika Khosla, And she says the issue of migration seems closely related to the issue of citizenship. In other words, it seems as though the urban centers want to reap the benefits of migration but wash their hands of the responsibility when migrants are in need under the premise that migrants do not belong to the state. This points to the issue that Mr. Rajan mentioned, that the fundamental problem is that issues of migration have been left out of policy making. How can policymakers effectively incorporate migrant issues into the very grain of policy so that such crisis can be avoided to begin with?
I think, as I said earlier, migrants to be mainstreamed. In fact, you might heard about historically, we used to talk about gender to be mainstreamed. Now we are, everywhere we talk about gender to be mainstreamed. Now I think we have failed to put the migrants in the mainstream, not in the policy making. That's why I said we know them. We can't move without them. In your own household, cooker, your Uber driver, you go anywhere, you are going to see migrants. Every industry, you are going to see migrants. Someplace 20%, someplace 30%, but today you can't manage without migrants. And this is not true in the country, the whole world, because the migrants are doing what I call them dirty jobs, dirty, dangerous, and demeaning. That the locals will not do. Local might do in another place. Kerala fellows might do in Dubai, but they will not do the work. So we need migrants from other states. So I think and we have to realize that. That's why we should think of the economy should work on what is the contribution of the migrants for the state GDP. We talk about agricultural contribution to GDP, service sector. We should talk about migrants' contribution. Migrants' contribution to the sustainable development goals. I was telling somebody yesterday evening, sustainable development goals which were set by the globally will be postponed because the migrants' move has been stopped throughout the world. Because the coronavirus is basically migrant disease. Because they are telling don't move, that means don't migrate. The migrant, they don't move, they cannot make money. Migration means money. They want to earn extra money by leaving their villages. So you told them don't go. So I think we are going into the what is called, unless we put some facts to these people, give them some voice through the economics numbers. This much they are contributing. City they are contributing. Without them there is no city. They are contributing this many sectors, service sector, construction sector. Can you imagine construction sector will collapse if they are all leaving the cities? That is why Karnataka Chief Minister said there will be no train will go from Karnataka. Because the construction lobbies went and told him we cannot do any construction. Then of course the migrants came out in a larger way. Then he said that train will go. So I think this is where the reality. Because like everybody wants to exploit them. That is why I was telling you who is responsible for migrants. Kerala government were feeding 500,000 people in common kitchen in something like thousands of camps. I was asking them pre-COVID, before the lockdown, where are they? They were working for somebody. Where are the employer? Can the courts punish those employers? There are good employers, there are bad employers. Good employers looked after their migrants. They are not left Kerala. I have seen them even today. Good employer, they help the migrants. I met one of the migrants. He told me, sir, I never went there because my employer told me, I will give you food. You stay here and I'll give you money to transfer to your house. Sir, why should I go even they give me free ticket? No. I think the bad employers should be noted down and they should be punished. Their industry should be sealed by the government. You never treat them well. That is what the Interstate Migration Act says. You should give them, employers supposed to protect them when they are in trouble. And you failed. Employers have failed. Now you have no right to tell them, please come back. When are you coming back? Who are you to tell them? You treated them. One of the migrant told, we were transported, to our states as what is called livestock. We were transported like livestock to our states. I think they are human beings. Your human right violation, because they are transported like you are transporting cows and buffaloes and chicken. No, very sad is happening here.
Let me add to that. I add, it's important to remember one thing, that Prime Minister has been talking about a $5 trillion economy that he wants to make India into. And we all have been, very proudly saying for last many years that India's greatest strength is the young population between the age group of 20 to 45 or 50, and which is a fact, historical fact. Now, this population, the working population, the young population, is exactly what we have not provided for. The government should have had a very well thought out plan long ago, how to deal with a crisis like this, how to deal with a situation like this. As Professor Rajan rightly points out, every employer could have been forced, instead of declaring the lockdown, that even while nobody says that lockdown is social distancing is not necessary, everybody admits that. But the government would have said that all those employers who are in position to keep their employees, their labor within their premises, they must maintain them, they must give them food, they must give them shelter, so that the wheels of the economy can keep moving. And government could have told them that you, Mr. Businessman, you, Mr. Factory owner, you, Mr. Real Estate Company owner, you will all benefit because your factories will be running, your construction sites will be running, your restaurants will be running, your hotels will be running. Keep these people with you. Ensure that they are properly looked after. If government had done this, rather than have a mindless, a thoughtless, and the most dangerous decision of a lockdown within 4 hours, we could have really done much better as a nation. I think this is where it is that, yes, let me answer it this way, that there has to be a policy, and this government has never thought of any policy on any serious subject.
Thank you so much. Our next question is anonymous, and it says, in light of the ongoing migrant crisis, one cannot help but notice a pattern in how the government undertakes policy making. Drastic policies are introduced not democratically and patiently, but rather in an authoritarian manner with very little warning. A testament to this is not only the current migrant crisis, but also demonetization. Such governance seriously shakes up the stability and security of the common person. So, my question is, what can we do to hold the government accountable for these sweeping policies? And I'd hope for y'all both to answer this question from the perspectives y'all hold.
Let me.
I will leave it there to answer the question, because it's something about governance.
Let me respond. It requires a mature democracy. And we don't have that maturity. These kind of arbitrary decisions have to be resisted at every stage by those in government. So it's not just the bureaucrats, it must be the parliamentarians, it must be the media, it must be the judges, it must be even the business community and other organizations who all must resist, who at all oppose the demonetization. None. Who is today talking about saying that this 4 hours lockdown was a completely mindless decision by the Prime Minister? Nobody wants to do it except Mr. Rajiv Bajaj. Now, this kind of a situation is therefore very, very sad for our country, that the atmosphere of fear on the one hand, or complete absence of courage in our character, has really destroyed the democracy. I'll give you two very interesting examples of America. When President Trump, a few months ago, when he had a crisis with Iran, he threatened that he will bombard all historical sites in Iran. Now, we all know that Iran has fantastic history of several thousand years, and President Trump threatened that I will destroy them. The general in charge actually came on TV and said that we will disobey the order of the president. Now, the last 2 days, 3 days, when President Trump decided to bring the army on the streets of every city in the United States to counter the protests because of the Floyd's death, the Pentagon said that no, the army will not come out like that. And many generals sitting and serving and retired have attacked the president very, very strongly. Where is that happening in this country? Nobody wants to do it. Nobody worth, his standing, his stature, be it in government or outside, is willing to take on the wrongful decisions which are taken. Both these decisions are completely arbitrary. Completely. Demonetization as this. And they cannot stand the test of Article 14 of the Constitution, which says that government cannot take arbitrary decisions. Now, nobody ever raised the voice. Our Supreme Court has gone into hiding. Demonetization was challenged. For last 4 years, the matter is not heard. And this crisis, nothing is happening. So I think there is a collective failure, and let us not say that this failure is only on the part of those in power, be it judiciary, be it parliament, be it the executive officers. There is a complete failure on us, the civil society as well. We have lost our moral courage. We have lost our moral strength. And this is where we have to introspect seriously how we can bring that back, so that next time this happens, we all can collectively stand up and say that no, Mr. Prime Minister, this is not what is good for India. We disagree with it. We request you to reconsider it. That's what is required.
Thank you so much. Now we have our last question, which we hope that you can include in your concluding remarks. And the question is, as young people, what can we do right now to help this crisis? This question is directed to both of you.
Professor Rajan, you please say first.
Yeah, I didn't get the question properly. Can you repeat it?
Yeah. So what can we as young people do to help this crisis?
What is that? What is that?
What can we do as young people to help the crisis?
I think young people, you want me to, because India has already said by our other speaker, Dave, that India is having the young demographic dividend. And you should all come out and say that we need to support the migrants in both, what is called, I said about the cash transfer, and then whatever help you can do right now to the migrants, because migrants are the engine of the economic growth. They are the engine. Whatever small way you can contribute for them at the time of this crisis, and I think you will be remembered.
Let me say one thing, that there is a greater responsibility on your shoulder than us. Our generation have failed you, and you therefore have a responsibility to ensure that you don't fail the future generation. First and foremost, for example, every young man and woman must ensure that not only they, but everybody around them follows social distancing very, very strictly. This virus is here to stay. The vaccine is a long time away, and therefore it is important that we must maintain social distancing as strictly as possible. We have to kickstart the economy. And we cannot kickstart the economy unless we maintain social distancing. Remember one thing, that if you don't kickstart the economy, we are headed for the gravest crisis that this country can ever face at any point of time. There will be starvation deaths, there will be law and order situation, there will be social situation, there will be psychological situation. Everything will, will collapse. The health system, we are already seeing, is not able to take the load of the existing coronavirus patients. Now imagine if we don't follow social distancing, and if the virus spreads as it is likely to, and as it is going to, as all the indications are, then I think we are going to really have a very, very bad crisis, even to provide basic health, basic medical treatment to coronavirus patients. Now, as a result of that, there will be very serious situation on the streets. Now, therefore, young people must now start ensuring that social distancing takes place. 2, young people should start debating, should start talking about the pros and cons of what has happened. They must talk about the 4 hours lockdown. They must talk about the consequences it has brought on the economy and on the health of the nation. They must therefore start a debate. If they debate, then it will automatically force the media to really speak about it. Today, why is media silent? Because people are not talking about it. They are only talking in whispers. Don't talk in whispers. Talk publicly. Talk. Start tweeting. Go on Facebook. Go on every social media and condemn the wrong decisions. Support the government on the right decision, but condemn the wrong decisions of the government. Tell them that this is not really good for India. Now, therefore, you have a great role to play because, you know, you young people are masters of social media. Masters. How do you think that Mr. Modi won the two elections, 2014 and 2019, so easily? How did Trump win the election in United States so easily? By the use of social media. You can create opinion. So you must follow that to really now generate an opinion as to what is good for India. I'm not saying that we have any easy answers. Nobody really knows the answers. Unless and until we all sit and think together collectively and provide answers, it is going to be very difficult. So I think the young people have a great duty to, you know, talk about it and, you know, find out what the answers can be by talking to themselves. And if millions of them start talking, I think the whole scenario will change and we will be able to fight not only the corona crisis, but the economic death that is now facing us in a much better way. Might be able to overcome both these challenges sooner than what one really fears. So I think young people have a great responsibility.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate both of y'all coming and speaking. Before we conclude the panel, I'd just like to say that we've shared 3 links in the Zoom group chat, and they're all links to NGOs that are helping with the migrant worker crisis and helping the daily wage workers. And given the enlightening talk we've just had, we urge everyone to sit and take some time out and donate to these organizations. Shrey?
Yeah, thank you again to all 3 of our panelists, Mrs. Barkha Dutt included. It was an engaging, meaningful discussion and at times sobering. We hope to continue doing this. Our next panel will be on the escalating standoff between India and China in Ladakh. And we hope to see you all there. In fact, we hope to see our panelists there if they would like to attend. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.